Hello and welcome to the DemiTaste podcast. My name is Doug. I'm your host, also known as DemiTastes. On the DemiTaste podcast, we usually talk about whiskey, but the best thing about whiskey is the conversations that we get to have, and we get to talking about a little bit of everything. And sometimes our main topic is not even whiskey. Like today, I have with me the founder, Efrem Fesaha of Boon Boona Coffee. Let me know if I'm saying that wrong. And the coffee manager, Ali Güldüren. Again, let me know if that's wrong. Please correct me. Of Boon Boona Coffee, here to talk about their brand of coffee and coffee in general. And we're going to get really geeky today. And we do have a live chat, by the way. So we'll be keeping a watch to see if any comments come in. So if you have any questions as we go through the basics of today, feel free to write that in the comments and we'll try to answer those questions as we get towards the end. And since this is a whiskey podcast, and this is American Single Malt Whiskey Advent 2023, I have given both of our guests a 2-ounce sample of 3 different American single malts that we're going to taste through at the end. So first we'll start with about 45 minutes of coffee, and then about 25 to 30 minutes of whiskey tasting, and that should be a lot of fun. Efrem, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, happy to. Doug, thank you so much. Appreciate it. And for the opportunity to be here and alongside the incredible Ali Güldüren. Very fortunate here to be here. Yeah, happy to kind of start off with, who I am, where Boon Boona came from. So I am of Eritrean descent. My family, we left there in 75, 76 as the war with Ethiopia was intensifying, and we went to Saudi Arabia. We lived in Saudi Arabia for 10 years, and I was born the 5th year there. And from Saudi Arabia, we made it to Seattle, and went, kind of grew up here, and the university here, and came out and started working in finance. It wasn't where I was planning on going with my career or my life, but it's where I ended up at. But a few years into it, I really got burnt out, just really fatigued with it. It was like 2008 financial crisis. And at the time, there was a lot of layoffs happening. And so, I was doing everything to avoid getting laid off because I just didn't want to be laid off because I had nothing. And so I worked my ass off for 2 years. And I burnt out, hit the wall. And I was like, I need to take a break. And, I was still in my 20s. So I was like, if ever an opportunity is probably the best time to do it now. And I told my boss, hey, I'm taking some time off. And it was about 6 months. And 3 of the 6 months were spent in Eritrea. And I had no intention of getting into coffee or even really thought about coffee as a profession for myself at the time. Like I wasn't drinking coffee really. I could remember like my first time having the traditional coffee ceremony. It was after having my first caramel macchiato at Starbucks. So I had my caramel macchiato first, and that was like my freshman year of college, just to stay up because I heard coffee keeps you up because of the caffeine, but it didn't work for me. I bombed the test actually, trying to drink coffee to stay up. But, I think it was shortly after that I had my first coffee ceremony, but, it was a long break. And then I came back to coffee when I went to Asmara, which is the capital city of Eritrea. And so, Eritrea was colonized by Italy for about 50 years. And in that time, a lot of the remnants that they left, some of them were espresso machines. And so in Asmara, you'd see all these beautiful cafes and, some would roast their own coffee inside there. And I remember just smelling it, just being in that environment. It was really inspiring, and just thinking about, like I'm from Seattle, but you don't see anything like this. There was no Starbucks Reserve. There was no, like, I didn't really see, I think the only one maybe at the time that was doing it possibly was Victrola in Capitol Hill, but it was, and because I wasn't really in coffee, I didn't know everybody inside of it, but I was like, I'd love to see something like this there. And kind of more of communal kind of gathering in a cafe space, which is what I was seeing. Additionally, like there's this tradition of, coffee ceremony, which we do in East Africa, starting in Ethiopia, but it's you pan roast your own coffee, green coffee. You start off with green raw coffee. You pan roast it. You get it pretty dark, medium dark, really dark. You can go super dark on it. And grind it, motor pestle, and then you put it inside of a clay pot called a jebana. And so you would have this clay pot, and inside of it, there's nothing inside of it. You put the ground coffee that you just freshly roasted. You add water, whether hot or cold, doesn't matter. Honestly, there's no measuring. There's no nothing. You just go, and you brew it, and until it gets to boil, basically, and you pour it on. You serve it, and you drink it for about a solid 3 hours. With those around. And it's a form of, it's a big part of the hospitality side of, Eritrean Ethiopian culture, where, if you're a guest, you're offered tea or coffee, and coffee is the one that has this entire process associated to it. There's no real other faster way. It's going to be us roasting it, grinding it, and brewing it. You're going to be hanging out for some time. And there's 3 rounds of it, but it's been done for a long time, and it's still being done now. Maybe not as prevalent and kind of in the diaspora as often. At least it kind of going to the next generation and such, but it's still very much like a big part of the culture. It's equivalent to that of our food, even though maybe most of the food most people in our generation aren't really making injera bread at home, but it is something that you're gonna go buy from the store or something. So it's something that's still such a big part of the East African culture. And so, I grew up with that. I saw the coffee culture in Seattle as well, and that what inspired me back in Asmara. And so I came back and I started thinking about how do I do something in coffee. And this is now the end of 2011. And, I kind of put together a plan, took it to a few banks. Yeah, because I was flat broke. I just finished backpacking around, just gallivanting around the world there.
Nice.
Came back and tried seeing about some funding, but that wasn't going to happen. And so really, I just kind of took it a different route, started playing with green coffee at home, pan roasting it. The same way we do traditionally. That led to an opportunity to just start putting it in local grocery stores, because I saw that there's no access to consistency in green coffee for small, very small roasters, which are individual families, and doing it for this traditional purpose. And so that's where I focused in on, and I did that from pretty much 2013 till about 20. I mean, we still sell green coffee, but 2016 we started roasting, partnering with folks to roast, and then by January 2019 we built out the Renton Roastery and Cafe, and that's where the journey with Ali and I really started as well. I'll let him chime in, because really from then on, we've been going at this thing to make it happen. and just yesterday we opened up another cafe, which was not in the playbook, but things just happen around here. So, I've been very fortunate to have him on the journey with me, to believe in this. But it's I love what I'm doing. I love everything about this entire thing, and very fortunate to be doing what I'm doing. So, yeah, I'll take a pause and let Ali jump into.
Hello, everyone. Hello again, Doug. Thank you for inviting us. It's great to be here and geeking out on coffee and other crafty stuff. And I'm coming from a very coffee consuming country too. I'm from Turkey. I moved here about 10 years ago, and it is a little different in Turkey. We don't necessarily take it from the roasting place, but it's yeah, it's in everyday life. It's consumed a lot, and very similar flavor profiles, similar way of brewing, and similar way of roasting actually too. But my coffee has always been in my life, just like since I'm 7 years old or so. And uh, when was that? Maybe it wasn't until like end of college into my grad studies, like that I didn't really start frequenting the coffee shops back in Turkey. I was doing my master's back in Turkey, and like it's Cafe Nero or Starbucks back then, at least. So that's where I was going. So that's, I think, before developing like interest and love for coffee, I started developing a love for cafe culture, and like not too different than what Efrem was talking about, how it's gathering. It has been in my life. There are like phrases that talks about how coffee is important, and like how sharing your coffee with someone is so important, and then everything things like that. But yeah, so as an extension of that, I believe like cafe culture was really natural to me, and then everything, and it was helping me focus better. So that was a plus. But it wasn't actually until 2000, when was that? 2010, that I have realized what coffee could be, which was I was doing a study exchange like in Boston, and while I was doing the like grad studies, and at a coffee shop, I had a first day or second day, just like had a latte. Back then, it was just the classic hair bender blend by Stumptown, and like 13 years ago now, and that was whoa. And my whole life it's been Starbucks, right? Like, can it taste like this? Like, no one told me that it can taste like that. And so then it started like to develop more, getting more intentional, looking into it, and chasing the coffee scene while I was in Boston for that winter. And after I came back and like finished my studies, realized I'm not a person to do PhD or who can write a dissertation, developing interest in coffee, and uh, yeah, almost 10, no, exactly 10 years ago, I moved to Seattle, and one of the two biggest like reason was to get into coffee, because I realized I don't want to do like academia anymore, and like can do coffee. I would love to do coffee, and it worked out. Honestly, because I came here and got a job at a coffee shop up in U District in Seattle, and Lanbu, the owner, was was really understanding of my passion for the coffee, and like, and it was a Victrola account at the time, and she allowed me, okay, just go join the Victrola cafe team. That's where you wanna go, and like she arranged that, so I switched to Victrola as a barista, and then worked there a little bit, then transferred to the roastery. This is where I learned how to roast with Dennis and Ethan, and so good times, but it was little slow moving pace for me, like how much I was learning, professional development and then everything, because it was an established busy roastery. So just like production a lot. So at that point, again, similar to what Efrem said, I quit. It's like I need to learn more. I need to find out more. So I organized a trip to Central and South America. Traveled. I started with one connection. Basically, I knew one farmer, and went down there, and the doors opened to the other doors. They introduced other people to our cooperatives, and everyone is just so welcoming there. Just like, and excited to connect with people, roasters from like US also. And so that was a good 2-3 months traveling in Mexico, Guatemala, and Colombia. And when I was back, I knew what I didn't want to do, and I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. So I was just picking up like temporary gigs at the roasteries, filling in for like different companies while they were hiring their like full-time roasters. And Efrem and I met at the event, or like as a volunteer, we were doing volunteering at the event. A couple of years later, he reached out and asking about this opportunity. Do you want to join? And like, sure, what are we doing? So we met, we talked, and yeah, it sounds like we are on the same page what we want to do and like how we want to operate this. And everything was set up, like it was this machine was already purchased and like hooked up, and there was a production space here. And yeah, 2019 February and through March and like as of April, I got my official title, got it fully onboarded and everything. Doing this since then.
Nice. I guess I could introduce my my own coffee journey very briefly, just so you guys have a little context of where I'm coming from. So I, I'm a software engineer. I, basically discovered coffee because of my internships and the coffee machines in the break rooms being super convenient. And funny enough, the whole time through grad school, I was not very much of a coffee drinker. But as soon as I had access to free, convenient coffee while I was working an 8 hour a day job, it became easy to sort of learn to love coffee, even as bad as the break room coffee tends to be. But it was my first coffee, so I didn't have the contrast to know. I also had a roommate who really liked making coffee, but sort of with like more commodity beans, like the Lavazza espresso beans, but we used that in a French press. So we instead of starting with the super dark roast stuff, I sort of got into like the medium dark kind of area pretty quickly. Realized that I like that better, and I pretty much never have owned a drip coffee machine because my first experience of coffee at home was a French press, and that's what I've been doing whenever I make coffee at home since then. Since I sort of turned coffee into a little bit of a hobby, actually before I turned whiskey into a hobby, um, I started getting things like a Chemex, and I also have a Hario switch. So I've been doing pour over for a while, and about 3 years ago now, I got an espresso machine for my birthday. And so I've been making, I got pretty good at making espresso. Like I just focused on dialing in espresso and making Americanos. And then I started making lattes and working on my latte art because someone online in the whiskey communities at that point had convinced me that being able to make good latte art was a sign that you're doing your milk texture correctly. And it's going to end up tasting better if you do that. So that's my experience basically as a coffee drinker. And I also was using commodity beans for the longest time until about mid 2021 when I happened to go to a flea market and bought a bag of Olympia coffee beans. And they were, I think they were a Kenyan natural processed coffee, which is the most different thing that I'd ever had to that point. And I made it as a pour over. And then I was like, oh, wow, this single origin coffee, I get it now. I've heard about this, but I get it. There's a huge difference between the Costco 3 pound bag of coffee versus the single origin coffee beans, and beginning to think about roast levels and process and that sort of thing. And then I was sort of just looking for something closer because I had to drive to wherever there was an Olympia coffee roaster location, which was not very close to me. And I just looked around like, oh, what are the local coffee shops and or like the local coffee roasters. I didn't expect to find one in Renton of all places. I figured this sort of thing is going to happen in downtown Seattle. I think it's Broadcast or Telegraph Coffee. It's one of those, I think, was sort of one of the first like local roasteries that I actually went into. And they're like, I have a recommendation for how you should brew this coffee. If you've got a Chemex, you should consider these coffees. If you've got espresso, you should consider these coffees and that sort of thing. So that got me into the idea that your prep and your coffee somewhat need to match. And it's a pretty slippery slope from there about how geeky you get about your coffee, because you start making very intentional decisions when you come to your equipment and your coffee and what you're going to brew on a given morning. And at some point I had 4 different kinds of coffee in my house. Actually, I think even now I do. But it's like I have a commodity for when I run out of the good stuff, and I have multiple single origins. And actually I'm drinking right now a latte that I made with your decaf beans. I forget the name of it. And I didn't bring the bag over here, but so that's pretty much me on coffee. And I'm going to stop talking about myself now because we don't have a ton of time. to talk about coffee, and I want to get back to talking about Boon Boona. So I wanted to ask, and since this is a whiskey show, I want to get geeky about flavor. So as far as flavor is concerned, and also craft, and as far as flavor and craft are concerned, what is Boon Boona's philosophy behind sourcing coffee? How do you choose which countries or which types of beans, which estates to work with, how you're going to roast the beans, that sort of thing?
I kind of start off with a high level. I'll let Ali kind of get into the deeper stuff. So on a high level, like, I mean, initially after that trip, it was really like, I was focused on just Ethiopian coffee for green coffee. And so, because that's what the community wanted. They wanted Ethiopian coffee, because they were primarily Ethiopians and Eritreans drinking it. The stuff that I was selling, at least the green. And, and even after that trip, honestly, like, I was like, if there are so many incredible places to source African coffee from, like, and I think that there's more opportunity to dive deeper into the continent and to be able to look at opportunities. And, to an extent, I remember some of the risks were that, okay, well, what if, just focusing in so much on Ethiopia or East Africa, what if something happens? Like, what if a war breaks out? Like, it was very much like there's like these like very scary things that people would tell me, like, you don't want to just, pigeonhole yourself to just one area of the world for coffee. You should incorporate some Brazilian and Colombian. And I was like, wow. I was like, yeah, for sure. I love those. That's great and such. But I was like, nah, I really just want to do African coffee. One, there was that, I had it in my head, like, I want to be intentional about where I'm getting it. I want to put more spotlight on where we're getting it from, and be able to get deeper into those places than that of someone who maybe, I kind of think about it as like, you'd be good at many things or great at one thing, and so it's kind of like, okay, well, let's just be really great at finding great coffee in Africa, which is still very challenging. Like, I mean, it's a huge continent. It's 52 plus countries there. So not all of them are producing coffee, obviously, but there's so much opportunity there. And so, I just kept saying, that's what I want to do. I want to focus on Africa. There are some selfish reasons too. One, yes, I am of African descent. Two, I wanted to have an opportunity to be able to have like some kind of commerce between places where I'm from and locally. A reason to be able to give back to Africa, to go see different parts of it. I love being on the continent, and to travel there is a great thing. And it's, to be associated or to be able to like do something there is such a satisfying feeling for me. And so there's a lot of selfish reasons too, but those were the things that got it. Like, that's why, like, I mean, even in 2011, when I was like kind of building it out, building the plan, it was all in there. It's like, yeah, I want to just do this. And, really Ali has taken it to the next level. Because as our coffee director, like, he's actually burdened with finding the coffee, and building those deeper relationships and trying to improve our process and how we source. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that was one of the things that we were aligning in terms of principles or visions and what we want to do, especially what I mentioned a little ago. Like, I knew what I didn't want to do and have a very fair idea where I would like to go. It was that I wanted to be at the origin, like in a real relationship with the origins that I was working with, and like connecting with people and everything. That's just, that gives me more motivation. That's very inspiring to see those people. I'm not coffee farmers, but I'm coming from like farmer family too. And I'm very familiar. They can't do farming anymore because it doesn't pay the bills. So they had to sell their land and everything and move on about 2 decades ago. So it was, in a way, very relatable to me, just seeing that travel like here to when we just decided, Efrem had already decided the business model or vision of that site, which sounded great because if you are going to like limit to yourself one continent in coffee, Africa is the best one to limit yourself. I'm sure there will be people who think otherwise, but I think it's the best continent to limit yourself to. Like, first of all, it's from there. Coffee is from there. So there are farms, there are opportunities to go see, like, oh, before that geographical expansion and colonizers take the coffee out of the country, like this is it. This was still how it was built. That's how it was consumed. What was the cultural relationship to it and whatnot. And so we do prioritize that in the sense that like really trying to understand each and every single origin, what the dynamics are, or around coffee, obviously, like what would be the socioeconomic challenges and or dynamics, and like how can we just do the least intervention when we're sourcing the coffee and leave it to them because it's their business. Just like we don't like anyone coming to us and telling what to do with our business. It's like we shouldn't go there and tell them what to do with their business, right? And so those were the things that we start from, and then as importantly, leaving more added value in Africa is a very important goal, significant goal for us. That and how is that possible? I think that's only possible by more ownership, more vertical ownership, and by the African people of the coffee. And so that's why we go seek out the producers, washing stations, or exporters, whatever it may be, depending on the country and how things work in that country. And of course, African owned, and ideally based in Africa. So Texas, state of Africa too. If not available at the time, to us at least, like African ownership, maybe based in the US as an exporter, importer. I think we have these like rankings, if you will. And certain countries we have managed to establish those relationships, like which is great. The other countries are still work in progress, but there's slow, but there's improvements. And also, as Efrem mentioned, like this gives us a opportunity to really dive deep in the continent and like bring out stuff that not many people are getting to taste. And for instance, no one really talks about a different lineage of Robusta that was evolved in Ivory Coast and which is tastier than the Congo Valley. No offense to Congo Valley Robusta, obviously, although it's the parent of Arabica and one of the parents. And so being able to do that, like connect with those producers, farmers, and like then going into Malawi, this gives us the opportunity so we can expand, like, oh, what's happening in Southeast Africa? How can we get there? Like, or supporting the new and upcoming countries, Angola. Angola used to be the Brazil before Brazil took over. It was the biggest coffee grower and then everything. And I mean, many people who are farming the Brazilian farmlands now, Angolan descendants anyway. And so that is happening. Like being able to go there, explore that. We're constantly looking for more like, how should I say, overlooked origins or like not underappreciated origins and bring it to the table. Right now, our majority is in the Central and East Africa, and we have just sourced our first West African coffee from Cameroon last year. We are buying that coffee again this year, so which is exciting. And yeah, the idea is keep this doing and increase the African ownership in the vertical value chain, be more added value, and don't tell farmers what to do to put them in a tight position, like with new or high tech or high, how should I say, steep learning curves, introducing those or demanding these things with post-harvest processing and everything. And it works out great here, but that doesn't necessarily mean back there it's worth the effort. How much extra money they are making worth the effort, at least in our case, in our circles of sourcing. So just like, yeah, we are taking their leadership on what tasting good. We are offered those, we taste them. They always taste good, so you don't need to do too much about it.
So let me ask a couple of follow-up questions, I guess. So as far as I've seen so far, you have at least a dozen, possibly up to 20 different varieties of coffee that I've seen over the past 2 years going in and out of Boon Boona. How close am I on that count?
I don't even know. The count is a lot.
You mean cumulative?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, I didn't count. I don't know the exact count, but close to 30 probably, my guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great
And at
question.
the moment, you have about 8.
Yeah. Right now, we have 5 single origins, 2 blends, 1 decaf, 8 available. 2. Technically, our espresso is a blend too, but it's not in retail bags yet.
And Ali actually was today mentioning that this is probably the smallest like variety that we've had in a while. We usually have even more, which is
Right, you've got that cart near the front door that has like a row for each thing.
That's what I'm like when you ask me.
There's usually 10, 12, and that's kind of visualizing. Yeah. No, I just went in yesterday, I think. So
okay.
To drop off your samples. So yeah, I did notice like, oh, it looks a little spare. Like, but I assume what's happening is that you're in the transition between the seasons, because it is, I mean, I don't know what the growing season is necessarily for all of your states that you work with, but it is getting cold. At least in North Africa, I imagine.
It is all sub-Saharan. There's no like coffee. It's just the belt between two. I don't know their English, but like 23rd and 27 latitudes. Like so, it's that belt. So it has to be there, subtropical or tropical. So nothing above like Sahara Desert actually. But you're right. It is. Should I say our biggest origin? Ethiopia is harvesting right now. It's going into the peak harvest and starts usually Octoberish with the lower altitudes, and like higher altitudes coffees just get like a little more towards around this time. And then Kenya, Rwanda, Burundi, Congo has 2 seasons, and like more like later in the spring, they start harvesting, process it, and ship out. Kenya ships out also in end of summer, August, and like around that time, Uganda. So it is not at all times year-round, but there are pockets that cover the whole year. And yes, so we are kind of intentional. Technically, there are 2 copies could be released, but we haven't released it yet, and everything just we are testing this out, seeing a little more limited options in the menu. So one of the ideas with that is if we have a little smaller number of offerings, each offering will be sold more. And if each offering is per coffee is sold more, that means we can buy more. And since we are always working with the same, we work with single sourcing agents, like exporter, washing station from each origin. And so that's the best thing to do, just increasing your volume, being able to go back, buying again and again from the same group, so they can build their own capacity, build up their own capacity, reinvest in their business, and they will know that I'm growing this coffee, but I don't know if anyone is going to buy it, kind of thing. So there is no that anxiety, stress around business or paying the bills, more importantly. And so that's one of the ideas too behind it, like keeping it a little more limited. But I can't keep it only so limited because I like variety in general. So it was hard for me to bring it down to 5 options actually.
Yeah. Well, 8 different available options is by no means small, especially compared to other coffee roasters. I feel I've been spoiled for choice every time I walk into Boon Boona, and they're all excellent. I haven't had one of your coffees yet that is not excellent. It's just it's easy to keep going back to you guys, even though my first love in single origin coffee may have been Olympia.
Yeah.
Once I discovered Boon Boona, it's been hard to go to anywhere else. So.
Thanks. Olympia is great. I in certain principles or certain ways of sorting, like I look up to them. They've been way more established, and they introduce these kind of concepts earlier in their days, and they are doing excellent job sourcing in a very good way. So definitely just like worth checking out.
Yeah, and same. Like, I have a deep love for Olympia as well. Sam has been nothing but a good friend, a good, someone who really honestly just always willing to open the door, have a conversation, and guide. There's really just really, really kind individual there. So I've been very fortunate. And so, we love Olympia as well. So there's nothing wrong. And actually, back to Ali, and he actually, just today, we started this conversation a little bit, but he did 12 sample roasts. So that means that there are some other coffees in the works, basically. So there's
a
more
sample roast day
coming. Yeah.
It's good. Yeah, it's fun though. It's fun.
Let's see. There's a phenomenon in the whiskey world of let's say very sought after products. They're often very rare because they're so sought after, and it varies depending on whether they're good or not. But let's leave that point aside for the moment, so that I don't offend too many people while I'm asking this question. So I went to Panama earlier this year, and the coffee that was all the rage in Panama was the geisha coffee. And I went to a cafe that had a geisha, which I think it was natural processed, but they said that it was like some kind of underwater, or like it was fermented in its own wine, something like that. Like basically, I would call that an anaerobic, I suppose. And it was super expensive, like $50 for an 8-ounce bag or something like that. And I had to have it because, like, this is when else am I going to go back to Panama ever again? I should buy this bag, take it home, enjoy it, and all that. My understanding is the geisha variety of coffee actually comes from Ethiopia. And I was going to ask, I don't think I've seen any, but I was going to ask, do you guys, or have you ever carried an Ethiopian geisha coffee? And if you don't, why not?
Yeah, that's very good. We have not. We have not yet. I'm not opposed to the idea, but I'm not too excited about the idea. It has to be exactly the way that we would source it, and like with the businesses that sourcing for us. And it is Panama. Should I say geisha varieties from Ethiopia? It's one of the land races that evolved here, and then some of the accounts, like of all the accounts that made more sense to me, because it also had more references to where the information was coming from. And in a nutshell, the missionaries take geisha to Kenya for a stint, like for a short stint, and like it's a very high maintenance variety to begin with, and like low yield, susceptible to disease, and yes, delicious, delicate coffee, but it's a lot of capital to get it going. And maybe that's why, maybe whatever, I don't know, it didn't just get rooted in Kenya. Somehow it made it to that research facility in Costa Rica, CIRAC, and like it's one of the few just very well known in the world, and they're doing great jobs there. And like it was in their like garden portfolio, basically growing, but not getting too much attention. I don't know again how it got there, but somehow it ended up in Panama. Someone from there probably took it, got there, and as far as I know, the first time it was discovered in Panama was on a farm which was owned by a former president of Bank of America, but like I don't even know why he owns coffee farm. I don't know, but decided to own a coffee farm, and I think one of the people, like his relatives, like working.
Don't ask too many questions, Ali. Don't ask too many questions.
What's that supposed to mean, kind of thing. Anyway, so someone was just like, let's give attention to this farm, and like doing some lot basis tastings, and like they taste this geisha, and it's just like, is this even coffee? This tastes like tea. It does taste like tea, and like they like just I don't know what should do this, but this is why not? Let's send it to a competition. Just breaking records since then. Cup of Excellence, it's just winning all sorts of Cup of Excellence. It is a really delicate coffee, not for everyone in the sense that like I can't really have more than 6 ounces of geisha brewed, and especially if it's anaerobic. It's delicious, but it's also intense for me. And but yeah, it is a very popular strain right now and associated with luxurious, like uh, really delicate flavor notes, high price, as you experienced there, and things like that. But it is just information about rare whiskeys and then everything. It's not objectively the best coffee, and or nah, it's
Yeah,
not.
there it is.
Yeah.
That's the statement we're looking for.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, I know. Yeah, as you said, some people will be upset and then everything. They may be, they're welcome to, but it is to begin with. Taste is such a subjective, personal thing. Like,
Exactly.
and like just imposing those kind of statements on other people, like basically trying to say, no, this is, you don't know what you are tasting, you don't know what you are, or you don't know what's good. This is the good stuff. I find it a little too self-entitled, so making those kind of bold statements. So it's more about what do you enjoy. If you enjoy serving this, if you're serving, it's great. Nothing wrong with that. It's just like don't try to impose it on other people. And
Yeah.
yeah. But back to that thing, like because geisha is actually, just it's a very Central American thing now. Everywhere you can see Ethiopia grows. There's this farm geisha village just next to the village of geisha, and I believe they grow geisha on the farm as well. I'm sure there are so many people growing it on the like motherland too, but like again, as I said, it needs to be coming from a place where we are already buying from. We are not gonna go and just find this geisha provider just to have a geisha. And if it's there, why not? Of course, we would do it. Before that, I would like to do Sudan Ruma. Actually, I think Sudan Ruma tastes better than geisha. And yeah, Sudan Ruma is another landrace, Ethiopian landrace. Yeah.
Nice. That's something to look forward to then. Speaking of things to look forward to, we have a question which overlaps with a question I would have asked. So I'll put that on the screen. Rich asks, have you ever or would there be plans to do a whiskey barrel aged using a peated whiskey cask? Now, I know that you have the bourbon barrel aged coffee.
Yeah.
Have you considered peated scotch or something like that?
We always consider what to do with that. So we had rye whiskey, we had bourbon, we had rum, and then right now we have gin barrel. And definitely peated cask. Because actually, when we were chatting about it, like about experience familiarity with whiskey, I don't have too much experience, but that's the most experience I am at, like more peated, like casks and everything. I do allow that flavor profile, so that would be great to do. And any sort of, we are open suggestions, and like we are moving roastery right now. We have outgrown our roasting space, and early next year we'll be, roasting out of a larger space, which will give us a lot of opportunities in that sense too. And like we are looking for a program to have like barreled coffee year round, like maybe 3 to 4 releases rather than keeping it only to holiday season, and getting more experimental with it, understanding coffee is super hydroscopic. Like if there's a flavor, good or bad, aroma in the like ambience is just gonna soak it up like a sponge. So we are trying to take advantage of that, playing with spice aged ones, spice aged one, and everything. Definitely.
Yeah.
We would love to
One of
have
the
it.
one of the challenges we had was also if a barrel that's easy enough for us to continuously agitate as well, because we didn't have, the system to properly, agitate the coffee without it being, a heavy lift.
Yeah.
And so but we were always open to anyone that would, we could find a barrel. We wanted it. We've always been open, and we've always asked around, like, yo, can we get one from wherever it's possible. We're like always asking, like, oh, do you have one?
Yeah.
But we love
Definitely. That peated was harder. Like for instance, the rye and bourbons we did, I was able to find 15-gallon barrels, but I'm not able to find 15 gallon. Like if it's above 15, 30 and above, just needs space and like some tools to handle. Even this gin barrel, we are doing it in collaboration with Métier Brewing. They brew the white IPA in that gin barrel. Then we put our green coffee washed in there, and they are handled because they have the equipment to handle it. So that's why I was saying it will give us more opportunities, because we can just easily acquire the tools and like then have our own 55-gallon, like full size gallons. Then the whole distiller world opens to us, and like more sherry, from sherries to mezcals to peated casks and everything.
Nice. Yeah, sherry cask. Ooh, that could be interesting.
I bet it will be interesting.
All right, so you guys definitely do a lot of thinking about barrels then. So that's nice. I hadn't thought about, that's a great point. I hadn't thought about if you filled up a 55-gallon barrel with coffee beans, that would be incredibly heavy that you'd have to agitate.
340 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the weight of
full bags. You take 2 full burlap bags, which is 132 pounds, and the barrel itself is somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds.
Yeah.
Obviously, the liquid content of the barrel would weigh more, but you don't have to move it that often. So, yeah. Because what I'm imagining here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you barrel rest coffee, you do need to basically shake the barrel around or roll it so that those beans all have an opportunity to touch the edges of the barrel.
Exactly. Right.
Exactly.
So rest is probably overstating. It's not very restful, really.
No.
it's restful as an ADHD can get restful, and like it needs to move, be it humble twice a day. The bigger the barrel gets, the more frequently it's done, and the longer it needs to sit. And definitely everyday agitation is.
Yeah. In the past, we would roll it around in the Renton Cafe, just throughout the.
Just pushing it?
Yeah, just rolling it literally throughout the day.
Well, there's a lot of space in there, so you could go in one direction long enough. So
that's true.
Yeah, but still, that's a lot of manual labor. If you could get a machine to do it for you, is definitely better.
I don't mind the labor. It's just not doable anymore when it's 55 gallon.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Fair enough. Follow-up question. Would you consider a new charred white oak barrel like they use for bourbon?
Definitely.
I wonder how that would end up tasting.
Yeah, like of course, one of our coffees right now has a like really like oaky finish. Just that's what it does, and like a little spicy cherry turihambe. And after tasting that, I was thinking about that too. Maybe it doesn't have to be used like coming from a distillery. We can just buy a fresh barrel, put it in there, and my guess it's gonna get little vanilla notes most likely, because the oak just use that vanillin, if not just fresh vanilla, some sort of vanillin notes. And my guess is it would add that little bit of dryness and would like oak dryness, astringency, and some vanillin notes. That's the guess. But I'm down. Seriously, if anyone out there has any opinions or want to see anything, just reach out. Like I'm open to anything.
I can't promise that I have a barrel hookup, but I could inquire. I know a couple of people who might have barrels they'd be willing to give up. That's good enough.
Ask around.
But yeah, new charred oak though. New charred oak is very expensive and definitely would not be able like that. You would be buying new from a cooperage, so that's not something that I would be able to do. Then not any better than you could do.
Unless someone in our team decides to learn how to do it. We got some people on the team who are just really crafty with wood and like really interested in craft liquors. So maybe I can comment soon.
All right, continuing this segue into our whiskey so that we don't get too close to 6:30 before we start that. So I've got this barrel over there in the corner. You can just see right above the microphone stand here. That is a barrel that I'll put a whiskey in, or I'll put a sherry, or in one case a pear brandy, and then I'll put something else in later to finish it. When I'm considering putting something in my barrel, the first thing that I'll do is blend a tiny fraction of what is going to come out of the barrel with, say a full glass of whiskey worth of what I'm planning on putting in. And I use that to sort of judge at least the direction that aging something in that barrel might go. Do you do something like that with your barrel rested coffees, or is it a little bit more of a thought experiment about what's going to work?
It's the latter, and
Okay.
yeah, it is the latter because I think to be able to do that, like keeping something consistent would be helpful. Like for instance, if we use the same coffee every time, that would be like more data points, a more reliable data point, and or same type of barrels, maybe just changing the coffee, things like that. But in our case, all the variables changing all the time, and it is a little bit more about. That's a great point, actually. As we go into the 55-gallon barrels, like we might want to have a way of just assessing because of the amount of the coffee it takes. It would be a waste if it just doesn't turn out well. And we'll still drink it, but it won't be probably making it to the public. So it's easier with 10, 15 gallons. Like we do just one barrel, even if we have two barrels, see if it's working out. If it's good, great, just fill in the other barrel too. And but yeah, otherwise it is more about the thought process, just sipping the thing. What I try to do, if it's available to us, I buy the drink made from that barrel, or in our case, just talk to the head brewer of métier, for instance, about flavor profiles. We are very familiar, obviously, with our own coffee's flavor profiles, and at that point, it's a little bit gymnastic, like which one go well. Like with this one, for instance, the gin barrel, the beer had, the previous one we did it with earlier this year in June. Like we did it with métier. Again, it was a bourbon brewed with and finished with fresh ginger and like coriander, I believe, and nutmeg. So like that obviously this will be there if more than the tannins actually, like the whiskey tannins flavor-wise, or even the barrel itself. It's gonna be more on this side. And which one of our coffees could use some warming spices? It would be complementary or create a nice contrast, if not complementary. That's the thought process we are going.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about sensory analysis. So obviously we're going to get into a little bit of sensory analysis with whiskey, and I'm going to ask you at some point to compare how your sensory analysis of coffee compares to whiskey and so on. I wanted to ask you, when you get green coffee beans that you're planning to roast, how do you decide what level of roast to do that, to roast the coffee to? How do you decide whether you're going to offer it as a pour over or an espresso, and any other sort of information about your sensory analysis of coffee? Keeping in mind that we're running a little low on time, so maybe we could abbreviate.
Yeah, sounds good. And that's a good question. It has two sides, actually. In a nutshell, we take the recipe, just like I was talking about, we do sample roasted and we cup it. There's a protocol how to evaluate, very standardized basic brewing method, so it can be repeatable. And so brewing element variable is just taking out of the equation. It's just the same. And roast ideally standardized too, sample roast. And then we taste it depending on the purpose. For instance, tomorrow is actually more about a component cupping. Like what I will be looking for is very different than when I'm cupping single origin offers from Burundi. And so that's why I'm saying there's coffee's inherent properties, flavor profile, right? And there's also many at the time. Like if depending on what menu has or needs, what kind of flavor profile, more developed flavors or lighter, brighter. And then I think this is how we decide how to roast, basically, in a way. Or once in a while we get coffees. We don't care what's on the menu. This coffee is awesome, and we would like to present this coffee in this way because we love it. If it's a smaller lot, a little more, just like higher scoring coffee and everything, we just treat it on its own, what we think would be the best for that coffee. But again, underlying what we think, because going back to the sensory analysis, this is very subjective. How you are tasting what you are tasting. Smell is right. It's the only sense that connected to the memory of all the senses. So just like a single smell, like half a second of smell, just can take you to 20 years ago. Probably we all have experienced that. So it is, it's then we think, we talk to, we are calibrate. That's the most important thing with the whole team, constantly copying, constantly talking. And which calibrating doesn't mean talking about the copy in the same way. It's more about understanding each other languages, descriptors, what we mean and what we prefer, what our styles, individual styles are. And it's always a group effort. We get together independent of what your role at the roastery, roaster employee. You have a just word in buying decision, you have a word on flavor profile, how we roast that coffee. And then, depending on if it's fitting in the menu too, that's great. We decide on the roast profile.
Well, okay. Let's move on into the whiskey tasting now because we're running pretty close to the time that I'd like to have for that. We might only have time for 2 of these, and that's fine. So I've given you 3 whiskeys. I have them over here. So the first one at 45% alcohol is the Westward Pinot Cask finished. This is one of their core lineup. I'll hold a note on price actually if you guys if that's something that you care to hazard a guess about later, rather than me leading the differences in the prices of these whiskeys. I'd like for you just to enjoy them as they are. So if you've got little tasting glasses, I've got my typical Glencairn whiskey glass here, and I've already poured the Westward whiskey in there. So things to know. So all 3 of these samples that I've given you are American Single Malt Whiskey, which means that they are made in America, of course, from 100% malted barley, more or less made in the style of single malts from Scotland. This is a new category of whiskey in the United States. I mean, they've been making it for decades, a decade or 2, depending on, or maybe 4, depending on how you count, when the earliest ones came out. But it's only just last year that they have proposed a definition for it. The government has proposed a definition for this category of whiskey, which we're still waiting on approval. But there's 250 or 300 distilleries that are making American single malt whiskey. And the 3 that I've given you today are some of the larger ones that have more wider availability. Just to give you a little bit of a preview, I've given you a Westward, which is from Portland, Oregon. I've given you a Balcones, which is from Texas. And I've given you a Westland, which is from here in Seattle, South Seattle. So
I like the peated ones. Yeah.
So starting with the Westward whiskey. So since you do sensory on coffee, you don't necessarily need me to give you the basics. But one of the things that you can do if you have more than one glass is pour these side by side and basically just describe how they're different to you. So I'll give you a minute to nose and taste, and just let me know what your impressions are of this Westward.
Would you recommend adding a few drops of water now at this point, or when we start, right before we start sipping? Doesn't matter.
That's interesting. So that's a good question. I would first experience, I would nose the whiskey and just get an idea for what it smells like. Give it a couple of sips, really small sips, like you're drinking a hot cup of coffee. Really, for me, I just like sort of part my lips and let just the tiniest amount sort of float in. It's not like a full-on sip. It's not like sucking through a straw. It's more like letting it float in and just getting that little bit and then sort of letting it coat your tongue. And the whole thing is just going to be like, what's that experience like? You don't need to necessarily focus on anything in particular, but I usually have a tasting wheel handy, and I'll go through like, is this floral, or is it grainy, or is it fruity? Is it citrus? Is it, sometimes you get salty on some whiskeys, but only just a little bit. Usually you have to add water to make that appear. Something to do with the chemistry, I guess. Things like that. So, and it's a lot easier if you compare two whiskeys next to each other. But the first thing I would say is just smell it, taste it, and then after you've had a few sips of that, that's a good time to add a few drops of water and see if the smell changes. It sometimes does, especially in peated or smoky whiskey. Any initial impressions of this one?
Before, I haven't added water to it, but it's really sweet on the nose, like very molassesy, just brown sugar. I've never had it like after maybe just a few seconds, like this taste of a cigar in my mouth. Not in a bad way, but like a sweet cigar, like very pronounced. I've never had that.
Yep. I would say that kind of that tobacco cigar type of note, I would say, is a distinctive element of the Westward profile. Almost all of their whiskeys have some degree of that. And for me, that same sort of flavor often reads as beery, a bit like a stout.
Yeah, I can see that.
Now, of course, because this whiskey is finished in Pinot Noir casks from Oregon, you have that bright fruitiness on the top layer.
It's getting sweeter, getting more the smell, the aroma, getting a little more vanilla forward as it opens up.
I'm going to add a few drops to mine now. A few drops of water. For me, I think the fruitiness and the molasses comes out a little bit, but this doesn't change a whole lot on the nose with some water in it.
Mm-hmm. I was kind of surprised that that smoky tobacco cigar feel faded as soon as I put a few drops of that. It just calmed down a bit more on that vanilla side for me.
Yep. All right. I think now probably would be a good time if you have another glass. If you don't have another glass, then you'll have to finish however much you poured in the glass or set it aside. You could pour it back into the sample bottle. People do that. It's self-sanitizing because it's high-proof alcohol, especially if you're just going to be drinking it yourself. If you're going to be sharing this with other people at Boon Boona, then you may not want to do that.
I have three
or
glasses.
You could just
one glass for each.
Nice.
I'm
nice.
good.
Yeah, or you could just finish it and you're going to have a good night later.
Sure. Before we move to the next one, I want to how for Westward's like more signature flavor profile, having that tobacco like sweet tobacco cigar like flavor. What gives that?
So
outside being does it have to do with casking, the way they do the casking, or distillation?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I guess we'll get to see the differences that happen in between these three whiskeys. I probably didn't pick the best contrast of apples to apples other than one factor between these three whiskeys, but I'll just tell you a little bit about Westward's process, and hopefully they don't feel I'm doing them any injustice or misinformation as I sort of go through this. So a lot of these American single malt distilleries tend to focus on the craft of things and especially flavor development. So a lot of bourbon, for example, views yeast as an alcohol, a source of alcohol. And then they'll column distill it, which is what you do with vodka, just not to as high of a proof. And then put it in new charred oak barrels so that you're taking as much flavor as possible out of the wash, the fermented product before you distill it. They're taking sort of as much flavor out of that as they can with the column still. Some people will probably debate me on, because some of this is it's a little bit subjective about how you feel, what the effects of these different things are, but just sort of the differences. So for something like bourbon, they're using a column still in most cases, and they're aging in new charred oak. So you get a lot more of that oak flavor to it. And you get less of that sort of yeast and beer input flavor. But for American single malt whiskey, they're often really focused on choosing the right yeast, and they're often focused on choosing the right grains, so that they're thinking of making a really high quality beer, especially Westward. When you go on the tour at Westward, they will serve you the beer, which is in process of fermenting before they've put it in to distill it. And they use pot stills, and pot stills allow more of that flavor to come through. So you start with a really high quality beer, the good yeast, the good grain, a long, slow fermentation time, just like you're making a high quality craft beer, and then putting it into a still and basically distilling it as gently as possible to keep as much of that flavor in there as you can. And then, so what's interesting about, I've tasted their new make, or the high wines, you might call it, or the White Dog or new make, that comes off of the still. And it tastes very estery to me, like lots of floral type flavors to it. And then they put it in barrels that are number 3 char, usually number 3, sometimes number 2, as I understand it. Usually number 3 char new oak barrels as the primary aging at Westward. So it's not like the number 4 char that you'd get in a bourbon like Jim Beam. It's more like, it's a little bit gentler. They end up extracting kind of chocolatey notes from the barrel that way. And then, of course, they finish it in a finishing cask for some of these releases. So this release that we're talking about right now is a Pinot cask. That sort of cigar flavor, that tobacco flavor, seems to come from the barrel. And I am not entirely sure the chemistry of why that is, because it doesn't show up in many other whiskeys that also use barrels, even number 3 char barrels. Something about the cooperage, or the exact way that they're toasting and charring the barrels, the exact length of time, the climate, the combination with the distillate, because there's a lot of chemistry that happens in the barrels, right? The alcohol is extracting chemicals from the barrel. The barrel is filtering out some potentially negative flavors from the whiskey. And then as they sit there and marry for 5 years, in the case, I believe it's 5 years in the case of Westward, other chemistry is happening between the extractives and the alcohol that is changing stuff that would have been present in the raw, the new make that came off the still, and those extractives and the chemistry that's just sort of combining there and changing the flavors. And in writing the book on American Single Malt Whiskey, I'm hoping to understand a little bit more of the chemistry of this. I admittedly don't really know, and I think a lot of whiskey drinkers don't put that much effort into understanding those things, because it's convenient enough to just say that it's a bit of an art and a science, or maybe more on the art than the science, and that they do what works. They try to do the same thing. They come up with something that they like, and they just keep going from there. We could answer questions like that. Where does that flavor come from? At great length, and I would mostly be guessing, but there are entire books on this topic if you're interested, and I could send some recommendations. I might put some recommendations for books in the comments, in the description box of the video.
Yeah, definitely. It's very comparable in coffee, like hard science, which one it is, and like the inconsistencies. Yeah, that's great.
So if we had time for 2 more, I would say we should go ahead and do the Westland, and then finally the Texas single malt.
Right.
Maybe we can taste these more quickly. So the Westland, this is Westland's flagship single malt whiskey, which is a blend of sherry casks, peated casks, and new American oak and refilled bourbon and that sort of thing. It's meant to be their sort of combination of everything in the portfolio. So you get a little bit of everything that is Westland with this one.
We will try down Westward. I get more tobacco on this one than the Westward.
More tobacco on this one.
This one, for me, yeah. But in the finish, not up front, less fruit, less bright. Not exactly what the earthy notes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm adding the water.
Did you guys like this last season? I think we like it. I don't know why. I think it's just the octave girl.
So there's something interesting about Westland that is rather uncommon for most whiskey. There's a type of oak native to the Pacific Northwest called Gariana oak or Oregon oak that is used by only a few brands. The McCarthy's single malt down in Oregon uses it exclusively for their aging, and Westland uses it for part of their portfolio. They have a whole release built around it. This type of oak tends to be more pungent. It's been said that it tastes a bit like a wood shop, like fresh cut wood. It has more vanillins to it. They say, I've heard it said like bruleed orange peel, toasted Madagascar vanilla, like getting really hoity-toity with the notes. But that sort of, as compares to the typical American white oak barrel, the flagship of Westland, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, does have a small portion of that in there. For me, it's a little bit hard to untangle actually what is the peat, what is potentially the Gariana oak, and what is potentially the sherry, and what is the new oak, because they've just blended everything together so well here. But I think it's really interesting comparing this to something like Westward, because they are almost diametrically opposed flavor profiles. Like even in the, bourbon might be something entirely different again, but within the realm of American single malt, these are very different from each other.
Yeah. When you were talking about Westward's like flavor profiling and signature, I was thinking about that actually, like where does the terroir of the oak used in the barrel finds itself? Like, is it how much it influenced the final product, final flavor profile, let alone a different variety of or different kind of oak? And
most
together for a long time.
Terroir is a bit of a controversial word in whiskey because a lot of people insist that terroir in whiskey doesn't exist. But then you have things like peat, which is literally earth, basically, that you dug out of the ground. Surely that is terroir, but peat can end up in anywhere. And then, like you said, since many would argue the major flavor contributor to whiskey is the oak, where that oak came from, of course, is going to matter. And the nice thing about a lot of these American single malt whiskeys, and especially craft whiskey in general, is they do have a sense of trying to do things that are more or less local. Like they'll partner with a brewery that's sort of local to them to do the brewing part, the beer that they're going to distill, for example, and they'll source local wood when possible. Like they're trying to get the highest quality barrels. That usually means partnering with a craft cooper as opposed to the really large cooperages that do a lot of the bourbon barrels, for example, that are meant for bourbon has to be aged in new oak. So those barrels are essentially mass produced. They're only meant to hold up to a single use. And of course, single malt is often in refill casks. So a lot of the casks that they'll use in American single malt whiskey are actually going to be from a cooperage that has built those barrels to last at least for a second, possibly a third fill.
Yeah. As I'm listening, I think I can make that point. Like when you say single malt, it's an agricultural product and single coming from a single place. And I don't think it's like it's possible to not have terroir in that. It might be much less influential, much less effective compared to coffee, but it's impossible not to have it. One thing, the other thing. When I say terroir, I don't. Please correct me if this is an urban legend, but Sky Isles, like known, what I'm reading about it, what I know about it, the wind patterns, the climate, the soil, and then everything is so conducive that they're, the classic, like signature flavor profile coming from that island, like that peat, and that's part of terroir. Wind pattern is part of the terroir. The soil is part of the terroir.
I, for one, am a believer in terroir.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It might
Especially
be a different definition than
well.
wine or coffee, and obviously, probably most likely it's different definition. Right. Or again, how effective it is, it would be different. But I think it's there.
There's a lot of different inputs. So what single malt means in both Scotland and the United States is actually that it comes from a single distillery, as well as the single malted barley grain input. Although you could have multiple different kinds of barley, which is one of the things that Westland does. This has 6 different malts in it. So they've got the peated malt, which they actually source from Scotland because Scotland has a long history of peating their malted barley. Um, and that's just basically the easy, even though you've got to ship it a long way, right? So like part of what's in here literally came from Scotland, already as basically a ready to go raw ingredient. And then of course they're using local grains as well. And Westland does a lot of cool stuff with, they're developing local varieties of barley. They're using the Pacific Northwest oak, the Gariana oak. They're using Pacific Northwest peat in one of their releases, not this one. And they're really driving for terroir and flavor development in any way that they can. Not necessarily cheap. A lot of those releases are quite expensive, but what they're doing is super geeky and really cool to somebody like me. I love when we're talking about making all local whiskey, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think we have maybe 5 minutes to go through the last whiskey.
Let's do it.
Okay, so, I forgot to hold up the bottle of the Westland, I think. So this is what this looks like, right? Westland from Seattle. You can go down to Soto and visit them. This is the Westland American Single Malt Whiskey. It doesn't say flagship on the label, but they call this their flagship.
Well, we'll be neighbors soon. Maybe we'll get a cask from them.
I like the sound of that. If you're listening, Westland, your neighbors, lend us some sugar or a barrel.
All right, the last one that I poured for you, and this one is 53% alcohol, so just beware of that on the approach. This tends to be spicy. Or I should say, at least it tends to be intense. So this is Balcones 1 Texas Single Malt Whiskey. So this also is an American Single Malt Whiskey from Central Texas, Waco specifically. They're about the same scale as Westland. We haven't really talked much about scale, but in terms of the quantity of liquid that they produce. But whereas Westland makes exclusively American single malt, Balcones also makes bourbon and corn whiskey and rye, and they're all excellent products. They even make rum, barrel aged and white. It's an overwhelmingly good portfolio in general, and their
Rum
American
is my
single
thing
malts
these
are
days.
some of their best products in my opinion, and this is just the beginning because they have a whole range of American single malts that are finished in different casks and so on. You've got a rum finished one, a tequila finished one, one that's blended with local and Scottish malt and everything, and this is probably representative of sort of the basics. Let's see. They don't give details about the specific casks they use to age this one, but I believe it is a proportion of new and refilled American white oak. Possibly ex-bourbon casks as well. I should go do my research on this. I should go read my own review of this where I've already done the research, but that was 2 years ago. So,
Well, unexpectedly smooth, actually. This was 53%?
53% alcohol.
Yeah. Okay.
Going back to what Ali had said a little while ago, where something that catches your nose can take you back 20 years. Literally, this took me back to middle school. Not that I was drinking whiskey in middle school, but it took me to a scent, something that I smelled right on the nose. It just hit me as soon as I smelled it. But
yeah,
we just try it. But
does it?
It might have been my cologne that I was.
The water makes aroma sweeter.
Yeah.
At least for these three, immediately. It's because like the edges gets less rough, more rounded, and I think by rough I mean the alcohol content. Yeah. It's interesting. Please let us know when you find out the chemistry, what's happening in there, when you add a couple of drops of water.
I think that I'm mostly going to leave that to people who have a much better working knowledge of it. There's literally, I bought a textbook, basically, that is the chemistry of whiskey, and it is dense. I wouldn't be able to begin to paraphrase it, but it's like, it's the sort of geekiness that I love like seeing and letting it sort of roll past me, some of that's going to stick, right? Like
Yeah.
I remember, certain ester names like isoamyl acetate, that banana flavor you get in Jack Daniels. That if you've ever done like a high school chemistry lab and they have you make the good smelling stuff or sometimes bad smelling chemicals, that's like one of the first ones that you do, that banana oil. Or they call it banana oil. It's an ester. Stuff like that, and like seeing how, that comes from the breakdown of the lignin, which creates some kind of acetate, which reacts with the alcohol and then forms that ester. And like there's all kinds of stuff like that that basically people understand. And then there's a whole bunch of interactions that happen as whiskey matures that people are like, well, if we start with these flavors, we might end up over here, or we might not. It's kind of hard to tell. It's not entirely sure what exactly is happening there. Definitely worth a read. It's not going to be my area of expertise as much as I can educate myself. I don't think I'll be able to speak very well on that topic.
I will look it up. That's interesting. I do love how learning or finding out how things work behind the scenes, the craft beverage, like what's going on in there in that liquid, changing that, because this was just more like, I don't want to say it's grapefruit actually. After adding the water, the flavor is that's bitter and sweet at the same time. It's like a good old grapefruit.
Yep.
And not necessarily the acidity, brightness of a citrus. Like I'm not getting necessarily citric notes, but that mouthfeel / the flavor that's bittersweet. But it is definitely much more balanced in that sense, like sweet bitter balance, like 450 like percentage ABV.
I'm grinning right now because you are saying things that I would expect to read in a review of a whiskey. So I guess coffee sensory and whiskey sensory are not so different. But mostly it's just go with those impressions as they occur to you, right? It doesn't have to be
more
a big
like the
fancy
vocabulary, like what words we are using, vocabulary. Otherwise, because we are smelling the same thing, we are doing the same. The whole process is the exact same biochemical process.
Yep.
It's more about what your memory bank vocabulary that you are used to, what you are paying attention to, right? Versus the peated flavor is just deal breaker in Ethiopian coffee. You just send that coffee back. But here, something you are chasing after. It's also like what's acceptable, what desirable, what just deal breaker, red flag. Learning those things.
Yep. By the way, I poured a little bit more whiskey into mine because when I added water, I added a little bit too much water and I kind of killed it a little bit. But when I had a whole bunch of water in it, I totally got that grapefruit thing that you were describing.
Okay. Yeah.
And what I normally get from Balcones is just a little bit of sort of like a toasted grain and molasses and lots of stone fruit, particularly peaches.
I can see the stone fruit at the for me at the end, kind of letting it settle a little bit. Then I'm getting some stone fruit there.
I find that stone fruit flavor profile in a lot of Texas whiskeys, not only from this distillery. Something about that really harsh heat, the sort of extreme seasonal changes between summer and winter in central Texas. It gets really cold. Not like frozen. Well, sometimes it freezes, but not like really below zero frozen. But like it gets pretty cold in the winter, and it gets to be over 100 degrees, 110 degrees in the summer. And that extreme difference in climate, season to season, really pushes the aging on whiskey to go very quickly. And yet, after 3, 5, 6 years, they come out shockingly well balanced, considering how intense the oak influence is on Texas whiskey.
I just visited Westward. Am I saying it right? Westward. That's the
so Westward and Westland are pretty similar names. So the first one is Westward from Oregon.
Westward.
The second one is Westland from Seattle, and the third one is Balcones from Texas.
I visited Westward, the Pinot Noir, that's finished in Pinot Noir, and it's really nice and well balanced. Like the level of barrel Pinot Noir there, the white notes or the sweetness, white sweetness, it's really balanced. It's really well done. It's like an undertone, not necessarily taking the central stage, but just providing the backbone there with the sweetness.
Yeah, this particular bottle was actually basically my comfort whiskey when I was recovering my palate after I had COVID. I lost my sense of smell for about 10 days, and then I lost my ability to connect like flavor sensations to words for about a month.
Scary.
And I was, yeah, that was like, oh, my career, such as it is as a whiskey reviewer, might be over, but at least I have this delicious whiskey to sip on. It still tastes good. I just can't describe it anymore. So.
Yeah, you're fortunate it was only 10 days.
Yeah.
Lucky it was only 10 days.
Yeah. Actually, what I feel like what brought my sense of smell back was I was doing an advent calendar, and one of the samples was from my favorite distillery, which is Clear Creek down in Oregon. They make McCarthy's Oregon Single Malt. That happens to be my favorite American single malt, possibly my favorite distillery in the world. And I say that it depends a little bit on how I'm feeling, because sometimes the smoky whiskeys from Scotland really hit the spot in a way that the American stuff doesn't. But if I don't know what I want to drink, it's McCarthy's Oregon Single Malt. Hey Phil, could you type that in the chat? Thanks. Assuming he's still tuned in. He said he was having some computer problems. Yeah, McCarthy's Oregon Single Malt. I'll put a link to, well, not a link, maybe a link. I'll put a description of what that is in there.
All right.
So we had a blind sample of that. It happened to be a single barrel of some interesting finish. I believe it was the cognac finished one, which I had never had before. And I opened up that sample and smelled it, and I was like, this was day 10 or 11 after I lost my sense of smell, and I had just been smelling stuff. I smell like a Lafroig, and I'm like, doesn't smell like anything to me. I don't know what that is, right? Like, this should smell smoky. I'm not getting anything. That was like Monday. And by Thursday, I was having, I opened up this sample, and I was like, that's my favorite. I can tell that's my favorite whiskey. I can smell the smoke profile that's there. I know 100% this is McCarthy's. And I also can tell I have not had this one before. And so that whiskey, which I have a whole bottle of now, thanks to the distiller, I got that he's also a personal friend. I got that as a Christmas gift from him, which is great. So I have a whole bottle of that now. And that's the whiskey that brought back my sense of smell. That's what that is for me.
I love that. Did you hug the like little bottle when it came back?
I'm not quite that sentimental.
10 days is it's great. One of our teammates, he's not with us. He lost his sense of smell, and it was gone for a year. So it was scary.
Yeah, and he wasn't like an espresso, like his espresso always take high level
that was rough.
Ability to really pinpoint espresso. And it was really a shame. It was really sad to see it.
Yeah, the worst I've heard so far until just now was 6 weeks, I believe. It took for somebody's sense of smell to come back. And that's not even somebody I know personally, just someone else in the whiskey. They're like, I still can't, it's been 6 weeks, I still can't taste whiskey.
Yeah.
That's nightmare.
Yeah, it's like, and imagine you're only seeing a fraction of, what I have as a whiskey collector and an amateur whiskey reviewer. Those cabinets behind me are entirely filled with whiskey.
Oh,
nice.
I have over 200 bottles of whiskey.
Wow.
My roommate
and imagine now if I lost the ability to taste on an ongoing basis.
God.
Yeah.
Right? That's a nightmare scenario. All the money that I've spent collecting whiskey, I would just have to give it away if I couldn't smell anymore.
Nice. Actually, all of my Sky Isles and like Scotch single malt little knowledge comes from my former roommate, who's also my like best friend. Like back in he's still back in Turkey, but he was when we were in college. Somehow he wasn't even rich, wealthy, coming from wealthy family or anything, but he was just saving up to start building his Scotch single malt collection. And so we always had 10 to 15 bottles of really nice whiskey at home. And so it's great. 200 I didn't hear. That's the most I've seen. Like 15 bottles together. 200 I haven't seen together.
I see some people who are in my amateur reviewing circles who have collections that are much more sizable than mine. They really go for the collecting. I try not to buy anything unless I have a distinct interest in tasting and reviewing it.
Okay.
And even then, I'm not up to 100 reviews published yet, because there was a long period after I lost my sense of smell. I pretty much didn't review anything for about 8 months. I just sort of was like recovering, and like I'm just, life is busy. I've just gone through this thing. I'm just going to enjoy my whiskey while I can. That was sort of what was going on. I didn't want to sit there for 3 hours tasting, researching, writing, and not be able to just enjoy the whiskey. So I spent some time prioritizing just enjoyment, and now I'm back to writing reviews. So,
I can
and actually,
relate
that
to
might be a
that.
good segue to sort of close this out. So I've talked about online whiskey communities. I'm part of a whiskey community. I'm actually a moderator of what the Whiskey Lodge, which is a Discord. Discord's mostly for gaming, but for some reason there's been a couple of whiskey communities that have sprung up there. So I will send a. Let's see if the bot is working on Twitch right now. So on Twitch we've got. Hey, it's still working. So there's a link to an invite to the Whiskey Lodge that just showed up in Twitch chat, and I will post it in the description of the YouTube video. So if you want to talk whiskey, if you want to learn, we're very beginner friendly in the Whiskey Lodge, and we've got people of all levels of expertise. But one of our favorite questions is, hey, I had this whiskey, I really loved it. What should I try next? We get a lot of people coming in there and just trying to expand their horizons ever so slightly with whiskey. And that's a lot of fun for us. We also talk about movies and sports and cars and memes, and it's a lot of fun in there. So if you ever wanted to talk to whiskey nerds that aren't super intense about it, that's a great place to hang out. I would recommend.
Great.
Yeah, Discord has a community for just about everything, Genji.
Yeah.
It's I think it's become sort of the new place for people to go that isn't a super public, like the website formerly known as Twitter or Instagram or Reddit or Facebook. It's sort of these little niche communities. The Whiskey Lodge is a little over 1,000 people in it, but realistically, I would say under 100 of them are names that we would recognize that like regularly participate. So it's not like you're putting yourself out there to the public and asking a question that you're worried about feeling dumb about, because it's going to scroll by and the people who see it are just whoever happens to be there when that question comes by, which makes it a really nice place for people to sort of put themselves out there and ask for help. And I didn't mean to turn this into a giant commercial for the Whiskey Lodge, but since you guys indicated a possible interest in learning more.
Yeah,
there you
no,
go.
thanks. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. We're all about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a we both have a friend that he's a doctor at Harborview, and similar to yourself, was starting to collect, not only whiskey but just everything on his travels, and his work was so intense working at the hospital. He decided, like, this amount of alcohol that I'm like, all this stuff that I have, I can't finish it on my own, and decided to open up a location of his own. It's called the Doctor's Office, which is on Olive, and it's incredible. It's great stuff, and we go in there.
Nice.
Honestly, just
Highly recommended. Definitely.
Love
Yeah.
The Doctor's Office on Olive. I'll look that up for sure. That sounds like
it's like a speakeasy style.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
I have had that thought as well. My wife has a background in my wife's family has a background in restauranting, so we figured, okay, she can run the kitchen, I can run the bar, and we could have like a little speakeasy, and stick to our morals of not overcharging for whiskey, because a lot of bars, if they know what they have, they're gonna charge up. Right?
Yeah.
Now the only the detail,
we're ready to come and visit.
Nice. Yeah. Joe, the former master distiller of McCarthy's, Joe. I asked him, like, hey, do you know of any good whiskey bar? He's got family in this area, even though he works down in Oregon. Well, he used to work down in Oregon. Now he's in Nevada. But even though he was working down in Oregon, he actually has family up in this area he used to visit. And I was asking, like, hey, do you know, does Renton have any good whiskey bars? And he was like, I don't think they do, but they really need one. And that's him putting another dangerous idea in my head.
It is. It would be similar to Boon Boona, because we were like, we want something tasty called intentional. Basically intentional. It doesn't have to be like high scoring, rare, luxurious. Just we want to do something intentional. We care about this thing. And when I was one of the earlier, just open up roastery and like in a different style of roasting or providing, why not with whiskey, right?
And Doug, who knows? Maybe, we find a way to create a little slot, a little space. You open up the roaster and you lift the roaster, you go downstairs, and all of a sudden
Ooh,
we're in
that's
the
cool. That's a
DemiTastes
cool
That'd be
spot.
cool.
idea.
Yeah,
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
you never
The
know.
the
Oh,
Boon Boona
speakeasy.
speakeasy. Hey, I
Hey,
saw
come on,
on
let's
that
go.
note, I saw that you guys I just saw the sign. I feel like I've been in there recently, but I having just gone on Wednesday. I just saw the sign you started selling wine and beer.
We did,
Yes.
yeah, we have, yeah, we did, and we're actually, one of the things that I think we've done, and I'd say it's just that we're stretched thin, but as a small business, that's what it is. But we have a lot of collaborations that we're doing with our coffee and beer, and so one of the things that I'm looking at doing is potentially even for our anniversary, and but we have about probably 5 coffee beer collaborations right now out there, and we love them, we enjoy them, we love our partners, but we don't get to we haven't done enough to really spotlight them and really how good it is. And so Fast Fashion, which is a brewery in Soto, delicious stuff. They have one that's called Pudding Cake that they use or Pudding Cup that they use our coffee in, and it is this delicious thing. Holy Mountain Brewery, Hellbent Brewery, Four Generals, and then Metier. 5 breweries, great breweries in our area that are using our coffee in different ways to make incredible stuff. And so we're like, we need to spotlight them. So we're thinking about doing like I don't know, some crazy event. I don't know. We're still putting it together. We may ask you, Doug, to contribute into this brainstorming session that Ali and I have about
Yeah,
how to
I'd
really
be
like have fun with it. And really that's it. We love collaborating with other small businesses locally or other local businesses, just in general, just having fun with stuff, just like we're doing here. So yeah.
I'd be honored. Let me know. I
Yeah.
can share what knowledge I have, which is admittedly mostly whiskey. I'm working on wine and beer a little bit more. I used to be a big beer nerd, but never to the level of understanding the methods of production and that sort of thing. So I'd have a lot to learn to sort of brush up on. But if you ever wanted to, I don't know, do a tasting of the bourbon from your bourbon barrel coffee, I could do a little tasting event of something like that. That would be fun.
Yeah. We would love that.
Anytime.
Love that. It's due
All
soon,
right, well,
actually, a new cask. Let's make this the next episode, maybe.
There you go.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
See, I know I've done a good
maybe
job
we can
because
bring
we're
Wasteland.
talking now the next time you guys come in, future collaborations. I'm glad that you
Yeah.
guys had a great time.
Yeah.
No,
no.
yeah, we love it.
We did. We loved it. Yeah.
Any kind of deep dive on anything that if we're learning something, we're enjoying it. Like this is what we love the most. So you spoiled us too. So
yeah.
Yeah,
Really
I mean,
appreciate this
I'll
episode.
admit
Thank you for this.
it's a little bit self-serving because I have this project going on of the American Single Malt Whiskey Advent calendar. So I figured I could tie this coffee interview into my whiskey project by serving you guys some of that.
Yeah.
So
So good.
you're welcome to
Serves
the
everyone.
samples. I'm happy to share.
That, all right? Don't worry about it. Don't
Serves
worry.
everyone.
Well, all right. I think we're pretty much ready to wrap up here. So I will close out. Pick your favorite of the 3 whiskeys or whichever one you have now, and let's do a little bit of cheers.
All right. Ooh.
I'm going for that Pinot.
Okay.
That's what I'm sipping on
That
again.
is, it's very hard for me to pick a favorite. So like bear with me here, but I will pour the Texas single. Can you please remind me?
Balcones.
Balcones.
That's how I pronounce it. I believe
Balcon.
the master distiller there also pronounced it that way, but
Okay.
it may also be balcones. I'm not
Okay.
entirely sure.
I will play my immigrant
Oh,
card and I'll
right.
call it Balcones,
Thank you,
and
Phil.
That's how I process that.
Phil just reminded me that I forgot to reveal the price points of these whiskeys.
Oh,
yeah.
So I will preface this by saying American single malt whiskey tends not to be cheap. All of the barley is an expensive grain, and the craft production methods that they do tend to be expensive. So just about the baseline price point for American single malt whiskey seems to be about $45. I haven't seen anything under that yet. I am looking. So if anybody knows, please let me know. So starting with the first one, the Westward Pinot cask is, I believe, somewhere around $80. It was less expensive when I got it. And full disclosure, this was a free distillery sample, in fact. So to me, it was free. That doesn't change how I feel about it necessarily. I try to maintain my integrity as a reviewer. And I have bought plenty of bottles of this whiskey as well. So that speaks to how much I like it. So this one, I believe, is about $80 somewhere. I may have been 75 or 85. The price changed recently. It went up $10. So that's a little bit on the pricey side. I left the mic. That's a little on the pricey side. The Westland flagship is nominally $60 from the distillery plus taxes. This one I got at Costco at wholesale price for $46 plus taxes. So this is about the cheapest American single malt that you can get, and it's nice and local. The other cheap American single malt you could get that's about the same price is going to be Stranahan's Blue Peak is their Solera aged one, which is a lower price point than their standard. The standard is about 65. Blue Peak is 45. So that's pretty much the lowest I've been able to find. But yes, this Westland, either 60 or 45, depending on where you buy it. By the way, if you go into the Westland tasting room, they will make your tasting flight free if you buy a bottle. So you could consider that $60 plus a free flight of whiskey. And I often will say that it's a little bit of a bias. It's just a little bit trying to justify the price of some of these bottles because, like I said, most of what Westland does is quite expensive. This is their basic. Most of their special releases are $100, and the all local barley development, local peat, local wood, those are $150 plus taxes. So that's pricey whiskey right there. And finally, the Balcones, when I bought this one, I think it was $55. I believe the price may have come up. So this is going to be somewhere in that $60 range as well.
Yeah.
And I regret now that I did not actually look up what these prices were because I wasn't planning on actually doing a sales pitch or anything like that. But just so you have a context of what these things cost. Does that change your opinion of any of these whiskeys?
No, it doesn't. Price is irrelevant usually.
Yeah.
But I would say going back to that has for me the favorites is I'll repeat myself with the Westward. Like I'm really impressed with their like blending of the Pinot Noir and everything. But the reason I'm going with Balcones to the final cheers, is that I wasn't expecting that kind of smoothness and complexity with that much high ABV.
Valid point. Yeah, it was complex for it being that strong. Yeah.
Usually, I mean, I'm not well versed. Maybe that's irrelevant. Like high proof and like complexity. My experience with higher proofs is just like a little more one tone, and or just like it's hard to get over that boozy feeling, boozy taste sometimes, and then everything. But this is not anything like that.
I did a couple of things here to help you. So one, I gave you two whiskeys that were lower proof first. So that way you were warmed up to enjoy the Balcones a little bit better. This is not cask strength, but it is, and that's amazing that they have a core line whiskey that is 53% alcohol. That's very up there. Most distilleries would not put their sort of core offering that high. Usually around 45% tends to be American whiskey's core whiskey profile, proof level. And the other thing is that's not entirely wrong that if you're, let's say, not warmed up for a really high alcohol whiskey, it can just overwhelm your palate. And so you'll lose a lot of that complexity. So being able to warm up with these lower alcohol ones, plus my suggestion to add water would have brought that down a little bit and opened it up a little bit more. And the other thing is, depending on the quality of the whiskey, and these are all very high quality whiskeys that are made on pot stills and meant to preserve as much flavor as possible. Whiskey nerds will often feel that cask strength whiskey, the higher stuff that hasn't been watered down at all, has the most complexity and the most flavors available to experience. So it certainly will depend. But in the case of these whiskeys, it's not surprising to me that the stronger alcohol is actually giving you more complexity. At the very least, it's a denser flavor because less water has been added to it. Yeah,
Cheers
so
to that.
I'll agree with that. I'm holding my gilded glass, and it's hard to say like, oh,
Just
how am I going to not use my gilded glass for a cheers
because
today? So, guys, it's been great having you on. Thank you for sharing so much about coffee and talking with me and letting me get nerdy about whiskey with you. Cheers, and until next time, I'll see you in the lodge.
yeah, until next time.
Cheers.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Doug. Cheers.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. Truly appreciate it. In the community, thank you.
Yeah.
See you next time.